Embassy of the Dead, Chapter 14, Mr. Sixsmith. And this one has a lovely picture with it. Jake watched the flame of the candle dancing. Opposite him sat Bad Penny, the flickering light illuminating her softly wrinkled face in the otherwise blacked-out room. He looked around at Stiffkey. He stood nervously at the edge of the room, still shaking his head with disapproval. "Keep looking at the flame," Bad Penny said, and just as she had done earlier, she reached across the table and grabbed Jake's hands. She smiled at him and slowly closed her eyes before starting a loud and tuneless humming. She stopped suddenly and let go of Jake's hands. "Goodness me, I forgot something." She reached up to her mouth, took out her perfect white teeth and laid them on the table. "They interfere with our signal," she explained, wiping her hand on the tablecloth. "He has to be able to pick us up, or we'll just be floating uselessly above the table. Now close your eyes," she said, taking his hands in hers and starting up her humming again. Jake took one last traumatized look at the false teeth glistening with fresh saliva and closed his eyes. The humming was a strange sound, slowly changing in note, first rising higher and higher, then swinging back to a low drone. At first Jake felt a bit embarrassed, but after a while he couldn't help marvelling at Penny's ability to endlessly hum for ages without taking a breath. In the darkness, time seemed to pause. The imprint of the candle's flame formed a pinprick of white light on the inside of Jake's eyelid, first flickering and jumping like the candle, then slowly centering in his vision as a white circle, like daylight at the end of a long tunnel, growing nearer and nearer and warmer until Jake was bathed in a bright light. He realized his eyes were now open and dazzled by the warm sunlight shining through his strangely translucent form. Jake had left his body. Jake had left Worstings. He looked around. He appeared to be sitting in some sort of waiting room. Through a large glass window he could see the skyscrapers of a city that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. Sitting beside him, eyes closed, was the transparent form of Bad Penny. The noise of the waiting room's air conditioning mingled with her humming. A voice spoke. It was a young female ghost, smartly dressed and with her hair pulled back tightly into a bun. She was sitting behind a large glass desk. On the wall above her head was a logo, a quill pen beneath the names Wyatt and Sixsmith. "Hello?" She paused and consulted a screen in front of her. "Bad Penny?" Jake nodded. "Yes, well, no, this is Bad Penny." He indicated the sleeping woman sat next to him. Her humming was suddenly punctuated with a loud snore. "And I'm Jake. Should I wake her?" The woman shook her head. "There's no point. If she's not awake now, she'll be leaving soon." "Are you a ghost?" asked Jake. The woman rolled her eyes and motioned to her translucent body. "What do you think?" Jake looked at Bad Penny. She was fading before his eyes and barely visible. Then, all of a sudden, she was gone and Jake was alone. The woman picked up a phone on her desk. "Bad Penny has left a delivery." She looked at Jake. "A little boy." Normally, Jake would have objected to the term little boy, but at that moment he was on his own in a strange place with no idea how to get home and not even a body to call his own. He'd never felt more like a lost little boy in his whole life. Mr. Sixsmith was sitting behind a desk, sweating profusely. He smiled as Jake entered. "How wonderful, a new friend!" He stood up and motioned to an office chair. "Take a seat." Jake paused. Beneath Mr. Sixsmith's shirt and jacket, he was wearing nothing but boxer shorts. Mr. Sixsmith's eyes followed Jake's gaze. I forgot. Don't be alarmed. Just a side effect of dying on the toilet." He took a handkerchief from his jacket pocket and wiped his face. Jake noticed a neat hole in the middle of his forehead. "The hole too, eh?" Jake blushed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stare. Mr. Sixsmith waved Jake's apology away, smiling. It's fine. I deserved it. Here's some advice for you. If you're going to steal money, take it from an orphanage or an old lady, someone like that. Never embezzle from a mobster with anger management issues. He sighed. Now to business. I'd heard there was a situation. I was hoping not to get involved. I hate dealing with afterworld affairs. Luckily for you, Bad Penny has put a lot of work our way over the years, and I owe her a favour, or two. Shame she got fired. Take a seat. Jake sat down and started to explain. Don't bother. Mr. Sixsmith waved his hand to hush him. I already know all about it. Wyatt and Sixsmith have eyes and ears everywhere. In fact, if that old curmudgeon Wyatt hadn't already passed to the afterworld, he would be calling the embassy right now and turning you in. He leaned forward. I bet they'd offer a juicy reward. Jake shook his head. He didn't like the direction this conversation was going. Not for me. I'm not very important. Mr. Sixsmith laughed. I was just kidding, Jake. I won't tell the embassy, client confidentiality and all that. He smiled, but his expression was strange and unreadable. Right, to business. So you want to know how you can deactivate Clause 7.3, huh? Clause 7.3, said Jake, frowning. Clause 7.3 did not sound good. Mr. Sixsmith rolled his eyes. In layman's terms, you want to know how you can cancel the death order that has been automatically placed upon you by the embassy for being an unlicensed member of the living who tampered with one of their boxes. Death order sounded even worse than Clause 7.3. Jake gulped. OK, I'll spell it out, Mr. Sixsmith sighed. You want to know how to call off Mawkins before he sends you to the eternal void. He looked at Jake. Listen, kid, you haven't got much time, but your big problem's got an easy fix. Basically, you need to get yourself licensed by the Embassy of the Dead. That will make Clause 7.3 invalid and Mawkins will be ordered to stand down. And the only way for the living to get a license is to become an undoer. And the only way to do that is to undo a ghost. Then you automatically get a license. You follow? I think so, said Jake. He looked up at Mr. Sixsmith, who still had a strange glint in his eye that wasn't altogether trustworthy. Why are you helping me? It's the kind of guy I am, Mr. Sixsmith winked. Jake wasn't a fan of winking. Stiffkey said you couldn't be trusted. Stiffkey, huh? Mr. Sixsmith shrugged and looked out the window. Can Stiffkey be trusted? Jake nodded. Yes, if you knew him, you wouldn't ask. Good, because the only hope for you is becoming an undoer, but Stiffkey has other options. He can invoke Clause 7.3 subsection C, so I hope for your sake he's one of the good ghosts, for there sure are a few that aren't. What's subsection C? Well, put simply, if he shops you and you go to the void first, then he's not in trouble anymore. You, though, will be straight into the void. Jake blinked before saying, He's one of the good guys, I'm sure of it. Mr. Sixsmith nodded. Lucky for you. He rested on the edge of his desk. You know what, kid? I like you. So here's some more advice. Don't get hung up on this good versus evil garbage. In real life and death, there's few that's simply one way or the other. He took a translucent cigar from his pocket and looked at it wistfully. The finest Havana cigar. $200 this cost. I was just settling down to smoke it when they got me. It can't ever be smoked now. I'm a ghost haunted by a ghost cigar. How's that for surreal? He put the cigar back in his pocket. I miss them. You know, Everyone tastes slightly different. Everyone. Yes. Funny how when you manage to lose one bad habit, it seems to get replaced with another. He looked away from Jake. Trust no one in this world. He seemed suddenly uneasy. Once more he patted his sweating face with a handkerchief. You should go. He got up and came round the other side of the desk, reaching out a hand. Good luck, kid. Jake stood up too and shook his hand. It felt damp and cold. But something was wrong. It took a moment for Jake to realise it was the way Mr. Sixsmith was holding his hand, wrapping his fingers all the way around Jake's and not letting go. At first Jake tried to gently pull it free. Then he looked up at Mr. Sixsmith. His face had changed. Now his eyes were closed and he was smiling blissfully. Everyone tastes slightly different. Jake tried to twist his hand free. He could feel his knees starting to buckle. The energy was being sucked from him. Jake could see that Mr. Sixsmith was laughing joyously, but all he could hear was a high-pitched buzzing in his head, getting louder and louder. Jake fell to his knees, pleading, but no sound came out. Mr. Sixsmith, the office, the city were fading. The world was fading. And that's the end of that chapter, with a scowl at the bottom of the page. What did you think? What do you think?
I think that is, well, it's not very good for Jake, but I know that nothing bad is going to happen to him because he's the main character.
Yeah, and we're only 1/3 of the way through the story, right? So nothing bad can happen to him yet. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, though? Because there's more of that wordplay. First, Mr. Sixsmith was talking about every one of the cigars, and then it turned into everyone. One word, which means people, right?
Yeah.
So the author really likes playing around with the words, doesn't he?
I think he's Mr. Sixsmith is going to be in trouble when Jake proves to the embassy that he's a good guy.
Yeah, maybe, except we've already had a page from the Book of the Dead that talks about what summoners are. So the Embassy of the Dead already knows what summoners are and that they're problematic. And Stiffkey told Bad Penny not to take Jake to meet Mr. Sixsmith. So I think they would just say, well, you should have known what trouble you were getting yourself into.
Yeah, but Mr. Sixsmith shouldn't be doing that anyway. And also, I think if Stiffkey was a bad guy and tried to do Order C or whatever it was called, the thing where he turns Jake in and then he's free because he turned in someone else. Mm-hmm. If he does try to do that, then Jake could also do the same.
No, because Jake's the living, not the dead, so a different bit of the law applies to him. But it really is interesting. I think what also is interesting is that the previous chapter that we had a big, long explanation about what the afterworld was and what the eternal void was, right? Do you remember?
Yeah.
And that was Bad Penny and Stiffkey talking. And then we need to have an explanation of what the summoner is. But instead of the author giving us another whole long chapter where Bad Penny and Stiffkey are just talking, instead they give us this nice set of pages from the Book of the Dead, and that gives us the explanation instead of them talking. So the author is kind of changing the way that we get that information from one chapter to the next.
Yeah, but we're over time, so we should probably end here.
Okay.